And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 5 unique builds for 5 commanders, where I take 5 commanders and find different ways to build them than what you would typically see. And will be the case here. I'm not taking necessarily specific commanders. I just have an idea that will work with a certain kind of commander. I will start out with Arwen Mortal Queen this time, which is a commander I've talked about a few times on my channel. Most recently, was talking about commanders that I think are maybe undervalued in the format. I think this is a really interesting one. 1 green and a white elf noble 2/2 enters the battlefield with an indestructible counter on it. Pay 1, remove an indestructible counter from Arwen. Another target creature gains indestructible until end of turn. Put a +1/+1 counter and a lifelink counter on that creature, and a +1/+1 counter and a lifelink counter on Arwen. So there is something happening here that actually is incredibly unique that you don't really see. It doesn't happen a lot, and that is the ability counter thing. How many commanders out there are putting ability counters on creatures? That is pretty rare. There is a couple, but this one is doing it, and it's doing it repeatedly. Obviously, what people don't like about this commander is, okay, well, it just enters the battlefield with an indestructible counter on it, and then you remove it and it's gone. But of course, I mean, you're building a deck around this card, right, guys? You can proliferate the indestructible counter before you move it, so you can just keep doing that. Anything that proliferates every turn, there's a ton of great proliferate in the format now. You can blink your commander, and of course, it'll enter the battlefield and get the indestructible counter back again. There's a lot of ways to do it so that you can repeatedly do this. That being said, though, the really interesting idea here, I think, is putting lifelink counters, right? And +1 counter is fine, but putting lifelink counters on things that are not creatures is the really funny idea here. So, for example, right? I'll just throw out some examples here. I have an Ancient Tomb in my deck. That is a land that is dealing damage, of course. You tap it, adds 2 colorless, and you deal 2 damage to yourself. We can animate lands here. Of course, we're in green. It's very easy to do. So you can animate your lands and then put lifelink counters on them, right? So I use any effect that animates a land, animate my Ancient Tomb, and then move because it's now a creature, I can remove a +1/+1 counter and a lifelink counter onto that creature. And now that animated Ancient Tomb has a +1/+1 counter and a lifelink counter on it. But likely I'm going to have an until end of turn effect, and then my Ancient Tomb will go back to being just a land, but the lifelink counter is still on there. Now, the +1/+1 counter isn't going to do anything. It only does something if that permanent has a power and toughness, but the lifelink counter will. My Ancient Tomb now has a lifelink counter on it, so when I tap it, it's going to, it's still dealing me damage and it's still gaining me the life, so obviously that will even out. I will no longer lose life from my Ancient Tomb, but also, if you're building this idea, you're for sure going to put the life gain trigger stuff in here. 100%. A Well-Lost Dreams will go in this deck, and when I tap my Ancient Tomb, essentially what happens with a Well-Lost Dreams is I tap my Ancient Tomb to draw 2 cards. That's what happens there once you put a lifelink counter on it, right? So people thinking that this is really fringe, and it is fringe, and it's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but tap my Ancient Tomb, draw 2 cards seems pretty good, right? Because of course I'm tapping it for 2 colorless mana, and then it's gaining me 2 life, and I'll use that mana to then, pay for the Well-Lost Dreams. So, seems pretty good, right? You got some hoops to jump through. Now, you could do other things as well. The animate land one, I think, is the easiest option to go here. You could also animate enchantments. There's not a ton of ways to do that, but there are some ways in white. Opalescence, obviously, is the best one. Again, now I animate my enchantments and I put a lifelink counter on them. Now, how can you use that is the question. You would have to find enchantments in white and green that are dealing damage. Now, of course, they don't have to deal damage to you. Again, you can have it so that, just like with the Ancient Tomb, I have this enchantment that's dealing me damage, or maybe dealing everyone damage, right? So you'd have to find enchantments that are throwing damage around, whether it be to you or to other players, and then you're gaining life off of them after, so anything that at the very least would temporarily turn something into a creature, whether it be artifact, enchantment, land, whatever, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for non-creature permanents that are dealing damage so that I can throw lifelink counters on them. I mean, likely you want them to turn back into whatever they were before, and then they have a lifelink counter on them, right? And then, you go to town. And then I guess the rest of the deck would be building around the life gain triggers, because you're going to be getting life gain triggers all the time. Really, really unique, interesting build for this commander, I think. Let's talk about Loot, the key to everything. Came out in the big score. It is, I think, the only commander that came out in the big score. Green, red, and a blue. Beast Noble 1/2, Ward 1. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of card types among other non-land permanents you control. You may play those cards this turn. A lot of people like this commander. It seems like it's pretty popular already. It's just doing Exile Tribal. Obviously, there's a lot you can do. There's tons and tons of support now in the Exile Tribal, which I will get to with my next commander as well. There's tons of support there. Also, the cast anywhere from your other than your hand. Lots of support there as well. This commander is very open-ended. So, of course, there's a lot of different directions you can go with it. That's probably why people like it. I completely stumbled across this by accident, talking about, I don't even remember what I was talking about. I was on the Discord talking about a different deck idea, and I remembered one of my 10 deck ideas from a long time ago, talking about Song of Creation, which is just such a powerful card that I think it's worth to build an entire deck around. 1 green, blue, and a red enchantment. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Pretty great. Whenever you cast a spell, draw 2 cards. Whoa, that's fantastic. At the beginning of your end step, discard your hand, though. Ooh, okay. And wouldn't you know it, the deck idea I came up with Song of Creation works perfectly with Loot, the key to everything. And you could just throw Song of Creation in any Loot deck. The reason why is because, of course, discarding your hand sucks, but you're always going to have cards because your commander's doing the impulse draw, right? It sort of replaces your card draw. I mean, that's how red decks already do their card draw, because that's basically all red has is the impulse draw. But, there's obviously more to build around here. And the idea I had come up with here is you build around the idea of, I'm discarding my hand anyway. Now, of course, because you're discarding your hand in your end step, anything that does the discard thing will work. You can just throw a Surly Badgesaur in here. Stuff like that will work. Bag of Holding obviously is a phenomenal one, because you will discard all those cards on your end step, and then you can just get them back later. However, there's lots of effects that play into this. Like, there is lots of effects out there that do the draw more cards, but then you have to discard your hand. So the effects that already exist, and a lot of them are in this, like Grafted Skullcap, right? There's lots of cards like that are already doing that will fit the theme. You are drawing cards like crazy with this. So anything that does draw triggers, you draw your second card each turn, maybe even draw your third card each turn, is very easy to do here. Anything that gets draw triggers is going to be fantastic here, but you're playing around the fact that you're going to be discarding on your turn. So putting cards into exile, and that's more the idea I built around here, right? Foretell works fantastically here. And again, works with your commander. That's why it's so great. Obviously, we're in the right colors here, but because you're doing the exile tribal stuff already, Foretell works fantastically, where I'm drawing all these cards, and then I can just shove cards into exile. I foretell them. So, of course, they're not going to get discarded on my end step. Suspend as well. Suspend and foretell are both mechanics, which, funny enough, I will get more to. That will work fantastically here because, of course, as I draw cards, I just exile them so they don't discard it on my end step. And so, again, you can go watch my 10 deck ideas video where I talk about this. It is, mostly built around Song of Creation, that idea, but there's lots more backups there where you don't necessarily need that card. It's also an enchantment. So, of course, it's a different card type. So it will get you that, impulse draw off of your commander as well. Loot just happens to be a perfect commander for that idea. So if you're someone who maybe ran out and made that deck originally because you saw that idea, I think Loot is a fantastic commander that fits there really well. Continuing on with the Exile Tribal sort of theme, kind of, Deathleeper Terror Weapon, a commander from Warhammer 40k, not super popular. It is one that, people might have a little bit of trouble finding stuff that works with it, other than the most generic way of doing it. So again, I'm trying to find a less generic way of using this commander. 2 red and a green, Tyranid 3/3, flash, haste. Creatures you control that entered the battlefield this turn have double strike. So of course, the easiest way to do that, and especially in these colors, is with haste creatures. And of course, your commander has haste. I imagine that's what people did with this deck. almost entirely. People probably did haste tribal. So the idea I have here works with any commander that is doing haste tribal. There are other commanders too that might care about creatures that have haste or have entered the battlefield this turn. The idea here is suspend. Again, I'm back to that. And again, because you're doing suspend here, you also can do any of the exile tribal stuff. Faldorn, which I talked about in my 5 builds video. I talked about how suspend and foretell and all that work there as well, which you could incorporate Faldorn in here because you're doing the suspend thing, but specifically suspend, not foretell necessarily, suspend. This is a suspend deck. You're doing a Gruul suspend deck because suspend gives your creatures haste. That's why it works here, right? Whenever you suspend any creature, when you cast it, when the suspend has finally resolved, you get all those time counters off, it'll come into play and the suspend gives it haste. It has haste until end of turn. So it works with a creature you control entering the battlefield this turn, having double strike. And of course, that also works. I'll throw out another commander here for this idea, Samut Vizier of Nakdamun, another commander, funny enough, that I talked about, I believe in that video that I think is, I think it's a pretty good commander. I'm surprised how unpopular it is. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, if that creature entered the battlefield this turn, draw a card. So, of course, the wording is completely different here, but this is obviously, if you're doing this idea, Deathleeper would be in the deck. If you're doing Samut as the commander, if Deathleeper is the commander, Samut is obviously going to be, these guys go in the 99 of each other's decks anyway, right? So this is another thing you do. If a creature entered the battlefield this turn works with the suspend. So doing a Samut suspend deck, because of course, all the creatures that you are suspending are going to be entering the battlefield. They're going to have haste. They're going to attack right away, and they're going to get you the card draw. So it is Deathleaper, Samut, suspend tribal, essentially. And then again, because you're doing, again, suspend is casting from exile, all that stuff will work as well. So you can throw that in as well. There's a lot you can do here with this idea. Let's talk about a brand new commander from Modern Horizons 3. That's right. I'm still talking about Modern Horizons 3. And even though I likely won't be buying any cards from that set, there is still, obviously, it's very impactful. One of the most impactful sets I've ever seen for the commander format. So I'm still talking about it here. And this is obviously going to be I think, one of the most popular commanders from the set. It's certainly one of the most powerful ones. But I have some alternate ways to go here if you don't want to do the Eldrazi tribal. I myself don't love Eldrazi tribal. I don't love Eldrazi. Just not a big fan at all. There's a couple different things you can do here, though, if you want to go a different direction with this commander other than the obvious one. So 3 mana, Eldrazi, 2/2. Whenever Azlask, the Swelling Scourge, or another colorless creature control dies, you get an experience counter. So we're doing the experience counter thing, and obviously you want to do colorless creatures here. And you can play Wooburg, creatures you control get +X until turn, where X is the number of experience counters you have. So we don't need to be doing anything else here, right? That just gives a giant anthem to all of our creatures, right? However, if you're doing Scions and Spawns, your Scions and Spawns you control gain Indestructible and Annihilator 1 until end of turn, which of course is the part that, is going to be really powerful. It also is going to be the part that people are going to hate. They keep doing the Annihilator thing, even though pretty much everyone hates it. So if you want to make a version of this deck, if you think this is a really great commander, but you don't want to do the Annihilator thing, you don't have to. If you don't like Eldrazi, you don't have to. So I will give you 2 options here, okay? If you want to do, maybe you actually want to do the Annihilator and Indestructible. That is really good, but you don't like Eldrazi, you can do other spawns. They don't specifically say Eldrazi spawn or Eldrazi scion. They just say scion or spawn. So I'm quite certain that means it will work with other cards that are making scions or spawns. And Spawning Pit is a card that seems like a slam dunk in an Aslaks deck. 2 mana artifact, sacrifice a creature, put a charge counter on Spawning Pit. So it's a sack outlet, which of course is going to work there because you want the dice trigger. Pay 1, remove 2 charge counters from Spawning Pit to put a 2/2 spawn artifact creature token in play. And of course, it's also colorless. So that part works as well. This is a slam dunk in an Azlask deck. It is making spawns. So it works with the spawn thing. It doesn't say Eldrazi spawn. I'm pretty sure they were just trying to save words on the card because it was taking up too much space. So they just said scion and spawn. So this should work with your Azlask. It's making 2/2 spawns, right? And so I looked it up and there are a few other cards as well. And Lost in the Damned is a pretty great one that is making spawns repeatedly. And again, you could almost build your deck around these guys rather than doing the typical Eldrazi spawn, right? Whenever a land enters the battlefield in your control from anywhere other than your hand, or you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, create a 3/3 red spawn creature token. Funny enough, this also works in the loot deck. So this should be an auto include in your loot deck if you're doing that, because obviously you're playing lands from exile there quite often, I would imagine. But also, as I talked about with this card, I think in a video a while ago, maybe 5 cards you're putting in your commander deck kind of thing, this works with ramping, just straight up regular old ramping, which if you're in a green deck, like this 5-color deck would be, it's very easy to get the triggers off of this, because a land entering the battlefield in your control from anywhere than your hand is any form of ramp. So you could just, I mean, I don't know if you want to build your entire deck around this guy, but he's making 3/3 spawn creature tokens. So, a really funny way to go with Azlask is doing the spawns, but not doing the Eldrazi spawns. There's actually a few cards that will work that way. The other thing you can do here, and I just made a deck for a patron of mine that said, hey, I want you to make me a 5-color experience counter deck. Again, he didn't want to do the Eldrazi thing. He didn't want to do the Scions or Spawns. He didn't want to do the Annihilator, really, because, again, that's just kind of mean. A lot of people don't like it. He didn't want to be the arch enemy in the game, which if you're doing that, again, if you're playing this commander, might want to have a Rule Zero discussion, a pregame discussion. Hey, I'm not doing the Annihilator thing. Please don't attack me, because likely people will. Because again, everyone hates Annihilator. 5-color experience. That's the idea here. Of course, we have a bunch of commanders. There are 8 in total now. 8 commanders that are doing experience counters. And of course, they do them in different ways. I'll just say, again, I built this deck for my patron, did it just recently. And the way I did it is I found that Azuri wanted those, small creatures coming into play. Marin wants creatures dying. That's another real easy one. And Minthara wants something to have left. It has that revolt trigger, wants something to have left the battlefield, which of course is very similar to Marin. Those are more the 3 I built around. And of course, all of those, as people will point out, also work with the Eldrazi spawn. So you can still do that, but basically we're doing 5-color experience counters here, right? And you can do it so that you more build around the other ones in the 99. You can do it more where you do your commander and you just get the benefit off of the other guys, because of course they all have benefits for having experience counters. But certainly, and I imagine a lot of people might already be doing that, 5-color experience counter commander. That's what this is as well. And we will end off with Yurlok of a Scorch Thrash again. That's right. This is the second time I'm doing this commander on this series, because I got another funny idea for this guy. This, again, as I have mentioned so many times on my channel, is the most monolith commander in the format, because a player losing unspent mana causes that player to lose that much life is only on this card and no other. So if you are specifically building around that ability, your deck literally does nothing unless your commander is in play, because there's no backups. There's no nothing you can do there. And so for that reason, I think that, this is very much a monolith commander, and the typical way people would build this deck. Honestly, I've been saying this since the beginnings of my channel. One of the first videos I ever made was reviewing the commanders from Commander Legends, and I said exactly that. It makes it so that, the way people typically build this deck with sort of the huggy effects, you basically just turn into a really bad hug deck when your commander's not on the battlefield, and you really want your commander on the battlefield. I already threw out the idea of doing more of a tapping theme, because of course your commander has a tap ability. You don't put any of those other effects in there, the mana flares and that kind of stuff. You just rely on your commander for doing the mana burn thing, and I just untap and tap my commander 3 or 4 times in a turn. That's enough to burn your opponents for like 9 or 12 damage, right? And then you put a bunch of other creatures in the deck that are tapping, and that's the theme of the deck. This one is completely different. In fact, now I'm going in the other direction where I'm actually making more of a huggy theme, and this is a really funny one. I thought a really neat way to go with this commander, because you're adding mana to everyone's mana pool, is any player may activate this ability, any of those effect. And funny enough, I have a deck. It's now a white-blue lands deck. This is where the idea came from. I have Excavation in that deck, which is a card that allows anyone to activate the ability. And that's kind of where I got the idea from. Why don't we put, there's actually quite a few, a bunch of cards in this deck that will allow any player to activate abilities. And you could fill up your deck with effects like that, obviously, in these colors. Like fan favorite, 3 and a black human rogue Tuktu has assist. Any player may pay up to 3 of the spell's mana cost, which, funny enough, that ability, the assist ability, also works, right? That's from Battle Bond. If you want to go check out those cards, the assist ability actually works here, where you can get your opponents to help pay for your stuff. So that'll work here, but also has pay 2. Fan favorite gets +1/+1 to lend a turn. Any player may activate this ability. Now, why would your opponents do that, right? That's the thing. And of course, you would have to play this in a political way. Feral Hydra, funny enough, is maybe a card that could go in any Yurlok deck. You know, the more I thought about it, I'm like, actually, this is a fantastic fit in any Yurlok deck. X and a green, Hydra Beast, 0/0. Enters the battlefield with X, +1/+1 counters on it. So you're going to have it enter with at least 1 on it, obviously. 3 mana, so that 3 generic mana, of course, can be paid with your commander's ability. Put a +1/+1 counter on Feral Hydra. Any player may activate this ability. So I'm on my opponent's end step. I activate my Yurlok, which is going to add 3 mana to everyone's mana pool. Guess what? They can use it to activate this ability. So that's a win-win for me, isn't it? Because if my opponents want to take the mana burn, they can take 3 damage. If they don't, they can put it into this ability and they've just made my Feral Hydra bigger, right? That's super funny. That's a really funny, interesting way to use a Yurlok. And there's a bunch of cards that do this. I mean, Warmonger, here's a funny one, 3 and a red. Minotaur Monger, 3/3. Pay 2. Warmonger deals 1 damage to each creature without flying and each player. Any player may play this ability. Things can get out of hand here, obviously, but if you're adding mana to everyone's mana pool with your commander, it allows people to use this. Again, you're going to do it in more of a political way where, I don't know, maybe somebody's got a Krenko deck or something, and you're like, go ahead and attack me. I'll just add mana to everyone's mana pool and we'll wipe out your board. You know, stuff like that. This would certainly be, it would be a bit of a huggy deck, but at the same time, it would be a very political deck, right? Obviously, Xantcha Sleeper Agent would be a slam dunk here. Again, this feels like almost an auto include in any Yurlok deck, I think. 1 red, black, Phyrexian minion, 5/5. Enters the battlefield under the control of an opponent of your choice. So, I mean, obviously, you're going to give it to the guy you don't like very much. Attacks each combat if able and can't attack its owner or planeswalker its owner's control, and has that 3 mana ability that anyone can pay, right? Xantcha's controller loses 2 life and you draw a card. Any player may activate this ability. So again, we're on that end step. I add 3 mana to everyone's mana pool and everyone's going to use it for this, right? Everyone's just going to have that player lose 2 life and draw a card. So seems pretty great. So that's the idea for this deck. Really funny idea is I'm putting a bunch of stuff like Feral Hydra and Xantcha and Warmonger, these abilities that everyone can activate, likely the ones that require mana. Now, of course, you can put whatever you want in here, but the idea is I'm putting all those ones that require mana to activate, and then I'm giving my opponents mana so that they can activate them, you know? So, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit of chaos deck as well, a little bit of hug, a little bit of chaos. If you like decks like that in the Commander format, I think you'll probably like this idea. All right, there you go. 5 more unique builds for 5 commanders. If you're at all a big fan of any of these ideas, feel free to go run out and make the decks yourself. That's what I'm doing here. I'm just throwing out these ideas. I don't have any deck lists or nothing. I just come up with lots of ideas, and I'm trying to go in a little bit of a different direction with what you typically see with some of these commanders, or in some of these cases, it's an idea I came up with a long time ago, and hey, we actually got a commander that fits this time. So have fun with it. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.